All right, it looks like we are live. We've got people in the chat. So far, things looking good. Welcome everyone to another live stream with Sweetcast. And today we have a special guest, Peter Simeti of Alterna Comics. Peter, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing well. I can't complain. So I'm really glad that you could come on the show. I guess the topic here is we wanted to talk about comic submissions, and then sort of some of the, how the sausage is made, I guess, so to speak. But first, I wanted to say that I'm really impressed with Alterna Comics. A lot of the decisions that you guys have made have been things that I've been thinking, like printing on newsprint, making the price just a lower price point. A lot of those things I think are really commendable. So yeah, I think you're doing great things.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, to me, newsprint and comics are synonymous. The two go hand in hand, and were that way for so long. And it's fine to have premium paper stock and a choice for consumers, but we did a really hard shift in the industry, and it is kind of a little bit more, at this point, I'm discovering a little bit more of a sinister reason as to why the shift was so hard. And it's our price point and using newsprint is rocking some boats. So be that as it may, we're going to keep doing it because comics and newsprint need to be a thing.
Can I dig a little bit deeper there, or is that a touchy subject about rocking some boats?
I mean, we definitely have butt heads with some creators, some other publishers, even some distributors about the audience for newsprint comics. The industry has kind of, as everyone knows, the price point is nearing $5 on average for a comic, which is absurd.
Yeah.
And it's affecting everyone in a big way. And one of the biggest reasons that they're justifying that price point is with paper quality that's obviously not newsprint. And it's not so much that newsprint is cheaper. It's one of the cheapest paper stocks out there, but it's not so much less compared to what's being done right now. And obviously there's 100 different factors that go into the cost of a comic book. But it's strange to me to see an indie company like us be able to have a $1.50 price point, be able to have the tremendous increase in readership that we've had over the past year to 2 years of using the newsprint. And yet we're seeing billion-dollar corporations having $5, $7, $9 comics. Yeah. And it's a very weird thing. It used to be the other way around. It used to be that the indie books would be $5 or so because it's more of a kind of a higher price point because there's no corporate backing and things like that. And industry is very weird. Industry is very weird right now. I'm sure you know that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So I'm curious with so the past year, everything just sales increasing, and I think that your readership's increasing. That's great. Have you noticed a difference in submissions? Are you getting more or fewer submissions, or has anything changed at all there?
Yeah, it was really funny when we announced the newsprint line, because I don't know how familiar you are with Alterna, but Alterna has been around for about 12 years. And predominantly for the first 10 or 11, we just pretty much put out graphic novels. When we started out early on, we did print on demand, really small runs. I mean, this was back in the time where I didn't know what was going to happen with Alterna. Our for anyone that can remember at all, our first website was our MySpace page. So it was pretty much purchasing alternacomics.com. And I didn't even know if we should put a page up or have a website. We had so few comics at the time. And I figured, we'll just put up like a MySpace page link, and it forwarded right to that. And at this point, obviously now things have changed, but we started with print on demand. And then I found that the single issue format, especially getting comics out consistently, wasn't really something we were going to be capable of doing. Because indie creators have day jobs, indie creators have other things going on. It takes a while to create a book. So for us to do this thing where we would build up single issues, multiples of them, before we went to distribution and all this other stuff, so we had stuff that we could put out in a timely manner, That wasn't really possible for us in the very, very early days. But I figured if someone put out a graphic novel once or twice a year, that wouldn't be so bad. That's kind of a weight that people can sustain and handle and be comfortable with. So we mostly just did graphic novels for that long. And then when we announced single issue newsprint, I think I got like 200 or so submissions overnight. And we usually got about maybe 50 a month at that point in time.
Wow.
So I woke up to an entire inbox full of submissions. I had no idea it would have been that crazy. And most of the people, the responses within submissions were saying, I would love to get my comic on newsprint because that's what I grew up with. And no other publisher is offering me the opportunity to get my comic printed so I can see it the way I used to love comics and how they used to be printed. It's a whole different, it's not just a nostalgia thing. I think it's also just, it feels that way for so many people, for that comic books and newsprint go hand in hand. And I mean, we do create our own. So someone wants to submit to Alterna, they get 100% of their IP. They retain that. So if a TV deal, a movie deal, a merchandising deal comes along, we don't take anything of that. They keep all of that.
Right. Yeah. Another benefit, I think, is for me, like I'll read something on newsprint and then I'll switch over to like a glossy comic, and it's just more difficult to read. I don't know if it's just me, but you get the glare. And so I actually really enjoy newsprint for that reason, because it's just a nice, just readable surface without the glare. So
yeah,
I like that.
Absolutely. And for those that don't know what we're talking about here, so I've got here's Psycho KO #1. The cover is kind of a glossier stock, so you see the glare from the light there. And then the newsprint, there's no glare. So that's the best way, unless someone goes to a comic shop, which please do, and you find our books, pick them up, give them a sniff too, because they smell nice.
Yeah,
that newsprint smell. I'm finding that the ones that we put out a year ago are starting to have a little bit of that aged newsprint smell. It's kind of funny, but it's nice. It's nice to see.
It ages like a fine wine.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So speaking of submissions, so it sounds like you go through a lot of submissions, and I mean, it's nice that Alterna is accepting submissions. There's a lot of comics publishers that will have guidelines and then right down at the bottom they say, we're not accepting submissions at this time, or no unsolicited submissions. When you're reviewing submissions, what are sort of like some of the big key things that you're looking for?
So let me see. First off, I want to say when we're submitting, when we're receiving submissions and people are submitting to us, it's always important, no matter what company, whether it's Alterna or someone else, always try to follow the submission guidelines as best as possible. I get a lot of submissions that you'd be surprised they do not at all. Some of them don't at all follow the submission guidelines. Some of them, it makes me wonder if they've read even the first thing that we required, which was the fact that we don't take pitches. And I'll get a pitch, which is essentially what I mean by that. It's just a sentence or two or a paragraph. There's no art. There's nothing. The person has nothing else done. They haven't even started to actually create their comic, and they're just pitching the idea. That works with some companies. Some companies want to see a pitch. It usually has to revolve around if the company has pre-existing characters or licenses or things like that, where they'll pair up creators on projects. But Alterna, I need to see the fact that there's something done, and I need to see a completed submission. And it's usually 5 to 8 pages is what I'd like to see, and that means top down completed, lettering, color, all that stuff. It's got to be good to go, because I can't evaluate a submission properly aside from all that stuff, aside from the basics, and let's say you follow all the submission guidelines for Alterna. As far as story-wise, I want to see that people can connect with the characters. I want to see they can either root for or root against the characters. I want to see that there's something clearly defined in terms of their motivation, in terms of the plot. It's not just something I see a lot in comics nowadays. It just feels like you're wasting your time sometime reading the comics. It feels like they just wander. The plot's just wandering along. And you can have a nice plot that does that as long as there's character development that takes place. But when it feels like it's just kind of killing time and taking up space and just dragging along and at the reader's expense, unfortunately, I don't want to see that. I want especially at Alterna too. Most of our single issues are a miniseries, so you only have so many issues to tell your story. You don't want to have like a 4-issue miniseries and 1 or 2 of those issues is completely unnecessary.
Right.
That's just, there's no excuse for that. So you want to make sure every single issue is something worthwhile. At Alterna, the dollar price isn't really an issue. $1.50, $1.99, whatever it may be. It's more the time. I don't want to insult the reader's time. I don't want to give them less of a value in terms of their time that they've spent reading the comic. I know some publishers, it's a time and a money issue. So if the reader's not happy with what they're getting, it's like they hit you twice. So we try to give a good value all the time, no matter what. And I'm glad that so far people agree that we have.
Yeah. So this is a good sort of segue into. I have several questions, and it seems like a lot of them sort of lean on one another. So I'm not sure what the right way to start this is. But so I'll give you sort of my scenario, and maybe you could kind of help me just talk through it and think through it, and let me know if I'm starting in the right sort of thought process. So I'm working on a comic. I've got an artist. I've got a script. I'm still working on some revisions on it. And I'm sort of at this crossroads of, the decisions that I make with this comic they're going to affect sort of the length of the comic, for example. So if I go crowdfund it myself on Indiegogo, to me, it seems like a good idea to have as thick of an issue as possible, so people feel like they're getting their money's worth. But at the same time, if you wanted to, like, if I was going to submit to Alterna, is that more of a risk to have a bigger first issue, or what's sort of the kind of the package that would make more sense or for publishing from your end?
Okay, so this is basically for those that don't know, this is the question you came to me with in a DM, and I said it was going to be a big answer to that, and then obviously that's why we're here and we're talking. I get this question a lot. I get this question a lot with people that go, should I submit first? Should I do the crowdfunder first? And if so, how do I package the comic for backers? And then perhaps if you pick it up, how do I package it then for you? There's multiple ways you could do it, and it all depends on starting first with Alterna. I recommend first submitting to us before you do a crowdfunder.
Okay.
With other publishers, honestly, there's some publishers, they don't even want to look at your book if you do a crowdfunder. They don't even want to consider it. There's other publishers, then they'll team up with you, and then some publishers, they want to offer different rewards that are crowdfunder exclusive only, as opposed to the distribution of the comic, of the graphic novel, whatever it may be. But with Alterna, definitely submit first, because if we accept the book, I'll help you out with the crowdfunding and promoting it and things like that. And also, we don't have to do multiple print runs that end up eating into the money you've raised.
Right.
Let's say you mentioned doing basically a graphic novel, so it's a thicker book and you can have a higher price point and things like that. When you do a crowdfunder, let's say you just wanted to fund one single issue comic, and if it's a $5 comic, let's say, you're going to have to figure out, well, if I have to raise like $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 or more, let's say, on a $5 one issue, that's going to be very difficult, if not, almost impossible, depending on how big your audience is.
Yeah.
But like you said, if you've got a thicker book, a graphic novel, you can put for $15, $20 or whatever it may be, it's going to be a little bit easier to raise that money. You got to be a little more clever. 20 to 25 is a sweet spot. So if you do have just one issue you're raising money for, and the issue is a $5 issue, you could do add-ons like stickers or T-shirt or something else with it. But of course, that's going to increase your initial production cost. You don't do any of it though after until you get everybody on board. I've met people before that they'll have all their stuff produced first. They'll have T-shirts and whatever else, and then the campaign ends, and now you have to go back to production because you didn't get enough like extra large, or you didn't get enough bags or stickers or mugs or whatever it was. And now your cost, it goes up higher because every time you got to go back to production on anything, you lose that slim profit margin that you would have had if you just made more of it to begin with. That goes for comics, that goes for T-shirts, anything is like that. Yeah. So there's all kinds of things like that to take into consideration. But if you do submit to Alterna and we pick you up, what I usually advise is you do a backer only reward if you want to get stuff out to people right away. If you don't and you're comfortable with waiting, then we can just do, once everything was out in distribution, you can basically get this stuff out to backers as well. So you'll get the copies to give to them, and then you can fulfill and so on.
Right. So as sort of as part of that too, then if you're looking at a new submission, do you like a one shot or like a graphic novel? Is that something that's you're looking for more, or are you looking for ongoing series, or is it irrelevant, I guess, from your point of view?
Ongoing is really, really tough. And the biggest reason for that is because at Alterna, especially, we don't pay a page rate. So you would be responsible for carrying that burden. You get an 80-20 split on the profit. It's probably one of the biggest in the industry. And it's not like Image where you have to pay, like, I think the last time I checked, it was something like $2,000 or whatever per issue.
Right. Something
people don't really know. You keep 100% of what you make per issue, but you got to pay that flat fee. So with Alterna, we cover the single issue cost. If it's a graphic novel, we can't do advertising. So then we would depend upon you to cover the graphic novel cost. But the thing is, you get a reimbursement for every issue that sells, every copy of that graphic novel that sells. So if your graphic novel costs $2 or so to print, you would get the 80% of the profit plus the $2 reimbursement. Obviously, you get more money back if it's a direct sale as opposed to a distribution sale, because distribution takes, depending who we're talking about, it takes between like 62 to 70% of your cover price. So distribution is really, I always tell people, if you can raise 10 to 20,000 or whatever it is with your crowdfunder, do not expect to hit anything close to that on distribution for the most part. You're going to probably hit about like a third of that. And that's if you're lucky, to be honest.
Right.
Every single crowdfunder Alterna's ever done has hit between about 4 to 20 times the dollar total than we have through distribution. So we could have, for instance, there was, everyone's familiar with Alterna's Mother Russia book. Mother Russia pretty much raised about $100,000 on a Kickstarter like a bunch of years ago. When that book sold through to distribution, made about like 4,000. So
wow,
it's a pretty big discrepancy. And you wouldn't think, oh well, if I go direct, I'm not going to meet the same market, the same dollar amount, the same amount of people. I'll definitely make more money because distribution, it's just, I'm getting the book out to so many avenues. So of course the money should be bigger. But this year in particular, it was jarring for us because we're starting to see our direct sales begin to overtake our distribution sales.
Right.
Not in terms of amount, but in terms of dollar. So it's becoming a weird market. And it's mostly because of the fact that every single year, and we're going to have it again, there's already shops that are going under or are about to go under this year, unfortunately. But every year the market shrinks. Every year. There's no expansion. There's no deals being done by Diamond to get comics and not every comic because that's ridiculous, but some of them, all the dollar comics at Image, Marvel, DC, Alterna that we do. Talk to Dollar Tree, talk to these dollar stores, get them in there. That's not that hard.
Right.
It's if you're the only distribution center in comics, you have all the leverage. So it's not that hard to go, well, we've got some great products here. We think they'll do really well in your store. Let's start you off small with either the top 5 or top 10 selling titles. And they don't have to be Alterna. They don't have to be Image. They don't have to be whatever. They could be just Spider-Man, Batman, whatever it is.
Yeah. Reprints even. Yeah.
Yeah. Get them out there into stores and get comics in front of people again. Because I've done probably 2 or 3 dozen Barnes & Noble signings in my life. Every signing, 2 to 3 people, they'll walk up, they'll see the book, they'll open it up, and they'll go, this is a comic book. And I'm like, yeah, it's a graphic novel, they bound them different. They're not single issue. And that's what they call them now. And they're like, I didn't know they still made comic books.
Oh, man.
Every signing.
Yeah.
And those are just the ones that come up to me. So there's bound to be other people within that very store. A store that has a section for technically comic books and graphic novels, they're not even aware that they still make these things because they're nowhere to be found. If you don't go out of your way to go to a comic shop, comics are dead. They don't exist. Yeah. Whoever does the distribution for Funko Pop, Diamond, talk to them, get some comics with those Funkos. Yeah. There's no reason for it. So it's not to say that putting these comics in places would kill comic shops. If anything, it would help because it would put that idea of comic books into people's heads. Right. And then, like we all did, most of us discovered comics not in a comic shop, but because we were out and about. You then go, where's more of these? And then because there's this thing called the internet nowadays, you look up immediately, oh, they have comic shops. And look at that, there's one near me. Especially if they can get a find a comic shop ad on the back or on the inside covers or whatever it is on the books, it'll really, really make a big difference. But this isn't what's being done.
Right. And I can attest to that. For me, so I got into comics by I went to a dollar store as I think I was like 20 or like I got into comics a little bit later in life. But I was at a dollar store and I saw they had it was just Spider-Man like 1 through 3, and they were all shrunken down in this little tiny. So I don't know where it came from or if Diamond was distributing those. This was like probably 10 to 12 years ago. No, longer than that, I guess. Huh? But yeah, for me, like it was just reading that and was like, oh yeah, this is awesome. And so you want to find most people, you have really specific tastes and things that interest you. And so you're going to go seek out comics, whether that's at a comic shop or, you're looking online or, just joining sort of the online comics community. So yeah, I definitely think that's important because you got to be feeding more readers. It helps everybody when they're more comics readers.
And it's kind of a testament too to where the bigger companies want to see their market share. And I think it has a lot to do with how Marvel and DC and Diamond, how they'd much rather deal with the small business aspect of the industry, which is just, that's every comic shop is a small business. Even something like Midtown Comics, as big as they are, they're still technically a small business compared to, Target or Dollar Tree or Five Below or whatever. And it's easier, and for lack of a better term, to take advantage of these people, as opposed to if you do a big deal with these stores that are, they set aside space on the shelf and all that stuff. You have to hit the deadline and all that stuff. Otherwise, there's some big penalties from it. It's easier to deal with the smaller businesses than it is to deal with the big ones and kind of play by their rules. The smaller businesses then have to play by Diamond's rules. So I could see why Diamond doesn't necessarily want to pursue a big business deal, but at the same time, why? Why? There's no reason for it, because you don't need to be even predicated on the fact that, well, we got to deal with that monthly new release kind of schedule. You could put out these evergreen titles that are more or less reprints or whatever else, just to have comics out there. The fact that that's not happening is not helping the entire industry. And then it trickles down from there, because then it makes everything essentially more competitive, more cutthroat. There's more comics now than ever before. There's double the amount of comics now that come out monthly as opposed to 20 years ago. Yet, comics are here while stores gone, down. It's about half the amount of stores from 20 years ago and double the comics. That doesn't work. That's not a good trend to go on. And because of that, we're seeing what we're seeing now in comics. We're seeing that kind of attitude. Everyone's frustrated. Everyone is feeling like there's no job security, because there is none, more than ever before. Because, if a artist or a writer or whatever thinks they were expendable 20 years ago, they're even more so right now. Yeah. So you get that whole mindset that seeps in, and it's kind of like everyone's wondering, well, why are comic pros so on edge lately? And all I could think is, we've all worked really bad jobs that we don't like. Yeah. We've all had those jobs where you're like, take your job and shove it, and you don't care. And you don't care about the customer, and you don't care about your coworkers, and you don't care about anyone who's impacted, because you're miserable in your job. And so if we have an industry where everyone's miserable in their jobs, of course they're going to then pass on that misery to the next person who's, just says slightly the wrong thing. And it turns into a cascading effect, because these things aren't just a private, you come into my shop and we had a bad altercation. I'm going to now kind of castigate you in front of thousands or potentially millions of people.
Yeah.
So the ramifications then keep on having a wider ripple throughout. And as soon as one starts doing it and they get away with it, and the next one goes, yeah, it's cool to just tell somebody. And it's cool to have that idea of well, yeah, screw you. You don't like it, whatever. Who cares? You can't keep doing that. And then that adds to the problem. So we just have these problems that feed into themselves. And it all starts at the top. It starts at the fact that comics can't seem to understand that they need to be in more places.
Right. Let's take just a little break to. So I don't have a super chat. I have everything I need to be monetized, but YouTube hasn't given me the green light yet. So I apologize for no super chat, everyone. But I did see a couple questions come up that I wanted to point out. And one is from Brennan Pitts. And he asked Peter, does Peter have any long-term plans to launch an ongoing Alterna-owned universe of characters?
No. That is not something for us to do. And I'll tell you, and it's not because I don't have a love for characters and universes. It's not like I don't like any of those things. It's more that this is a creator-owned company. Yeah. So if you're talking about creator-owned comics, you're talking about people who are very passionate about what they're creating. And some people may not be that passionate, but I don't want those people at Alterna. So everybody at Alterna is very passionate about what they create. They care a lot about their characters. They have very specific visions for these characters. As soon as you start talking about creator-owned universes, you start talking about there has to be editorial oversight. There has to be somebody to pay these people to create what that editor wants them to fix and adjust. Because if you're creator owned, you go, well, this is my story. This is my character. Why are you telling me to do this and this and this with it? Why are you telling me my guy is not going to star in this book this month? It turns into that very, very easily. And what happens is that you get infighting. You get the whole breakdown of what creator owned is all about, right, which is to champion the vision of that specific work, of that specific creator. If you get these universes involved, it very quickly descends into madness. Right. So you have to have this, if you're going to do a universe, you have to have something that is on some level, at the very least, even if it was a 50-50 ownership, something where the publisher can get back and recuperate money from what's being of the comics being sold. This way they can then put that money into paying creators to do the things. But then you're talking about selling over rights. You're talking about essentially becoming a licensing company at that point. You're talking about there is no real sense of creator ownership. It just turns into, you know, kind of what we have everywhere else.
Right.
So it might be possible for somebody else, but that's not where I plan on taking Alterna.
Yeah. No, and I think there's something to be said for focusing and doing what you do well, and you know, focusing in on it. Yeah, I actually really like the idea of creator-owned comics because, generally speaking, they're more accessible to new readers because you don't have all of this history that you'd have to go back and sort of learn. And for somebody that's brand new to comics, yeah, being able to just go and pick up a graphic novel or even a series of graphic novels, yeah, it's nice. So I do think there's definitely a place for both.
Because I think the most we might get at Alterna would be a small kind of crossover or something like that. Maybe one or two creators talk and they collaborate on something. But in terms of a universe with you know, overarching storylines and events and this and that, and it gets pretty crazy pretty fast. And I think Lion Forge is trying to do that, but Lion Forge is not having as good of a go about it as they want you to think that they are. And I'm not trying to put down Lion Forge for what they're trying to do. It's just, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to manage all of that in that kind of way. And I think that they're seeing, you know, as soon as you start playing in the superhero realm, there's so much dominance, especially in that genre already. It becomes very difficult to create characters that are long-lasting, iconic, really impactful and interesting without starting to draw upon too many similarities to the characters that already exist.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a really good explanation. So I want to pivot a little bit to crowdfunding. Correct me if this is not true, but I believe I've heard, I want to say it was on one of your live streams, that you have a 100% record for crowdfunding, being successful at crowdfunding. Is that correct?
Yeah. As far as raising money for our books goes, we have a 100% success rate. The only ones that didn't raise, there's some floating around out there of funds that campaigns that didn't quite raise their funds, and there's a lot of different reasons for that. Those comics didn't continue necessarily at Alterna, or they were, some cases those campaigns were launched without my knowing, and it turned into a bit of a hairy situation. So all the ones that we help and we approve of, and we basically tell people, yeah, go to this one and check it out. It's 100% success rate so far. I think it's something around 25 different books at this point.
Great. I'm just going to take one more break here and remind everybody, I do not have a super chat, but if you want to support either Sweetcast, the best thing you can do is subscribe and just hit that thumbs up. That really helps. And then also for Alterna Comics, I think I heard you're pretty close, or you've made it to 3,500 subscribers on your channel. That's another thing you can do to support Alterna, is go over there and subscribe. Just a reminder, everyone.
Oh, wow. Are we close? I didn't even check. I know I put the call out and then that was kind of it. Let me give it a little check. Oh yeah. 3503. Cool. Thank you guys.
Nailed it. Yeah.
Appreciate it. Yeah. We have the best readers. And I always say that all the time, but it's so true. I love all the readers at Alterna, and really just appreciative of them all. If we didn't have the great and wonderful people supporting us and reading our books and everything else, we wouldn't have much of anything. We'd be kind of just wasting ink and the poor trees of the world.
Right. And that's another thing is like, yeah, I'm everybody talks about this all the time, but just appreciating the readers. I know, like, it's crazy to me because it is a small industry, but I can go on Twitter and you know, get like comic pros will talk down to me, and I'm essentially nobody. Yeah, so it's good to hear a publisher that's being positive toward readership. Yeah, so I commend you for that. That's good.
Yeah, I'd love to see more of it, but you know, it is what it is.
Yeah, not much you can do about it, but be better, I guess. Yeah, so I curious when you're looking at submissions, when you're looking at the art, and have read through your submission guidelines a few times, but I've read through a lot of submission guidelines, so sometimes I confuse them. But you want to see, is it 5 pages or at least 5 pages of sequential art?
Yeah, at least 5 pages. I think on our maximum, I think it's 8 pages. But the thing is, if we like it and we want to see more, like you could have a whole issue done, you can have a whole series done.
Sure.
Don't send the whole series. everyone sometimes I get submissions where they'll send through like 4 gigs of a submission, and I'm like, they didn't read the guidelines. They didn't read the guidelines. And then I look, and it's their whole series. You don't want to send that. You don't want to send that to a publisher for multiple reasons. The biggest one being perhaps the least obvious. Guys, you don't want to just immediately trust publishers. Okay, if you send them along your entire series and especially to the wrong person, they can easily take that series, even if they don't like how you executed it, they can take your idea and capitalize on that. And I mean, there's corporations that are very, very well known for specifically getting submissions opening just to basically steal ideas from people.
Oh, yikes.
So you want to be careful. Don't give away everything, you know. Move along in the process, and when the publisher, you know, develop a dialogue. I always say this all the time. People are always very concerned with if their book is good for the publisher, right? If my book is going to be a good seller, if it's going to be something that appeals to a publisher or a submissions editor or whatever. You also want to make sure that that publisher is good for you. All right. Don't just submit to anyone who's willing to take it. You know, look at their catalog, look at their books, even buy some of them if you can't actually just find them in a store to check them out, and make sure that they're doing stuff that's up to par. Make sure that it's not like you go in the shop and let's say you pick up an Alterna book and you hate it. Let's say you hate every Alterna book ever made. Why then would you want to be publishing at Alterna?
Right.
You know,
if you don't like newsprint, yeah, you wouldn't want to be submitting to Alterna either. Yeah.
Yeah. And even though our graphic novels are in premium paper stock, I think there was a question or something like that in the chat. Our graphic novels are on premium paper stock, but our single issues are pretty much always going to be on newsprint. So even if it's something like that you don't care at all for newsprint, you don't want your book on there and things like that, you know, it's all that kind of stuff you want to take into consideration. Is this publisher right for me? Even things like the $1.50 price point. You know, there's some people that go, well, I know I can sell like 5,000 or 6,000 of these at $3.99 or $4.99. Then go to a publisher that'll do that. You know, chances are though, if you know you can sell 5,000 or 6,000 at that price point, you could probably sell 10,000 or 11,000 at Alterna. So there's all these things though that go into play. Just because someone has submissions open, and we have our submissions open all the time. I know some publishers have just a certain window, but don't just blanket submit to anyone, because what happens is that it's like anything else. If you're an artist, you'll draw out 4 or 5 thumbnails of a cover design, and there's always 1 or 2 that you don't like, and you're like, please don't pick that one. I don't really want to draw that one. I just put it there to put it there. And if you do that, as soon as you do that, that's the one that person's gonna want to go with. It just always happens for some reason. So you always want to make sure you put something out there that you're excited about, and when you submit, make sure you're submitting to the publishers that if they do pick you up for a deal, that you wanted to be with them, and not these ones that are just like your safety publisher. You know, you get something out there, make it count.
Yeah, and I could say the same for creative teams. So like a lot of my subscribers know that I've been in the process of finding an artist. I believe I have one now. I just have to, you know, a couple things we need to make sure work out. But yeah, like I put out a big call for in a few different places for artists, and you'll get artists that are responding that you once I start asking them questions about it, they're like, well, I don't really have time for this. And you're like, well, why did you apply? Why did you submit? So yeah, I can only imagine because you're in a constant state of sort of looking through talent and all that. So yeah, definitely. So another question. So with crowdfunding, it seems to me when I look at things, you'll see like a few pages. They're sometimes consecutive for crowdfunding, sometimes not, and usually those pages I would imagine are going to be just the most exciting pages to look at or the most impressive. When you are getting submissions, do you like to have the first 5 to 8 pages, or is it like the best 5 to 8 pages?
I generally like to have the first 5 sequential pages.
Cool.
And the reason for that is I like to see, does this person know how to develop a hook? Can you grab a reader within those first 5 pages? Technically, I want you to grab a reader within 2 pages. If you could do it with 1, that's ideal.
Yeah.
But within those first 5, that's when most readers will kind of give you a little bit of room to tell your opening. If your first 5 are, very, very confusing, you can't really get a sense of what's going on, that doesn't help. That really, really, really hurts your submission or hurts your comic. All these things, when I look at a submission, I go, well, what's it going to be like for someone reading this book or picking it up on the stands, and they don't have the benefit of a creator to say, hey, my book is about this, the way you would at a convention.
Right.
It's just completely, the cover looked interesting to them, and they pick it up and they open it. And if they're absolutely confused or lost or uninterested, or the art is just not of a professional quality on any level, or it doesn't work with the story, all those things go into decreasing the ability for that book to sell, which is the thing I look for. I look for that book to actually go from the store to that reader's house for them to
Right.
buy that book. So those are all the things I take into consideration. Then the other part of it is a big part with publishers. It's it's something that a lot of publishers, I find, that they don't want to admit to this. If there's a good book, right? Your book is good, and you feel like it's of good quality, and the story is well planned, and the characters are interesting, but the publisher still says this isn't a good fit. That's something that drives creators crazy when they say it's good, but it's just not a good fit for us. That's not a publisher trying to dissuade you or tell you some kind of cryptic message, or not give you proper feedback. What that essentially means is the publisher says, you know what, I might buy this book, but I just don't know how to sell it.
Yeah.
So it's the publisher going, I don't know how well we're going to be able to sell your book. I don't think we're going to be of benefit to you. So that's something too that creators will hear, and they'll think it means something, and they'll get really upset, and they'll think that the publisher is not being honest or whatever else. Most of the time, that's what that means, though, is that it's the publisher not feeling confident in themselves, not necessarily not feeling confident in your book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point, because there's there's also just the brand, and like you said, and a big part of your submission guidelines is character driven stories. And I guess that makes a good story anyway, but there may be examples that don't necessarily fit into what Alterna Comics represents, I guess, perhaps, or if not Alterna, then other publishers. And so, yeah, it doesn't hurt at all to go try other publishers. In fact, it's I've been turned down by publishers a lot, not just for comics, but for novels, and that's just sort of part of the process of creativity and trying to get your work out there. So yeah, it can be discouraging, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your project is no good, for sure.
Exactly. I see a question in the chat from Muttman here, asking if I say no to creators more than I say yes. Absolutely, I say no more than I say yes. To put it in perspective, our single issue lineup has about 30. I don't think it has 30 titles just yet, but it has about that many. I get upwards of 200 submissions a month.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of no's. And it's not because they're all not good enough or they're all not good fits for Alterna. There's so many different reasons that go into it. There's a lot of it ranges from everything from how was my back and forth even in the response with this person, because sometimes you'll get a very odd response sometimes when you write back and you want, oh, what's the production schedule like on this book? Do you have this person in place and that person? And sometimes it's met with some very odd responses back. Or it can range all the way from the fact I've had people flat out say, I don't plan on promoting this on social media at all. I view the publisher as the only person that needs to promote. And I'll reply back, it's good for your own brand, for your own sake, to promote your own work. Right. It's not just, at the expense, at the interest of the publisher. But like, let's say if you had no creators at Alterna supporting their books, no creators at Alterna that cared to interact on social media, to care to talk to readers, retailers, etc. The next time that creator does a book, let's say it's not at Alterna.
Yeah.
You have no leverage, no network, no fandom, no anything. You're starting from scratch every time instead of building up every time. So there's all kinds of reasons as to why you should always promote your work. But I've had responses like that. So sometimes in that case, there'll be books, sometimes I like them. But if I'm looking at that and I'm going, wow, this is going to be a real uphill battle.
Yeah.
Then it turns into a situation where I have to unfortunately say no. So there's all kinds of reasons that I say no to a submission. And I just recently went over, I think it was a couple days ago or last week or something like that, where I went over the top 5 easy things you could do to improve your comic. And they're very, very easy and they're often very overlooked. But it's very simple stuff. And one of the biggest things, if not the biggest thing, in every comic submission that I ever see when it comes to it needs help, it's the lettering. It's always the lettering. So make sure you get a good letterer. It's probably the least expensive part of your comic, but lettering is one of the most viewed, if not the most viewed part of your comic book, at least from someone who's reading the thing, which is what you want them to do.
Right.
That's going to be the thing people look at the most. So get a good letterer. It's usually between $10 to $15 for a good letterer per page. So that kind of stuff, it all plays a little part into getting into a publisher you want to get into.
Yeah, and that's a great point too, is that you don't need to be like, there's a temptation to say, well, I'm going to do it myself. And I get this way sometimes, like I can color comics, but that doesn't mean I should. There are better colors out there for sure. And lettering is one of those things I think that a lot of people think, oh, I could do that. But yeah, a good letterer makes a huge difference. Great, man. We've been cruising through things. I did see one question here though that I really want to hear the answer to. It's from Gabe 301. He says, Alterna Comics, will you tell us a crazy submission story?
Oh boy. A crazy submission story. I don't think anything could quite top the submission stories I've had where they resulted in me getting a death threat.
Whoa. Holy.
I've had maybe like 3 or 4 of those over 12 years. But it'll be very very benign feedback half the time. I'm never ripping people to shreds. That's not what I'm about to do, especially on a submission.
Sure. Yeah.
It'll just be stuff like, oh, it's just not publisher ready yet. Make sure that you check out your lettering, compare some of the stuff that you love. There's some comics that you really love and things like that. Make sure, look at what yours look like compared to them. Look at the pacing, look at the panel composition, look at lettering, look at all that kind of stuff, character development, and think about, what the comics I love, like how did they do it, and really study comics and analyze them. And then, take that and learn from it and apply it to your own comics. And that's usually the feedback I give. It's pretty plain, obvious type of feedback, but it usually seems to help people because it's always the obvious stuff people tend to overlook. They really overthink that stuff.
Yeah.
But sometimes I'll respond back with something like that. And this has happened 3 or 4 times, and I'll get someone who completely flies off the handle, rips me to shreds, rips every book at Alterna to shreds, and then is like, you better hope I never see you at a convention because you might not get out of there alive, kind of thing. So,
Wow.
so it's just,
and then you're glad that you rejected the submission in that case, right? Because there are going to be other problems. Jeez.
It's I don't know. People are passionate. It's par for the course.
Right.
So I see this the death threat type stuff all the time. People go, oh, we get a death threat, and I got a death threat, and someone was mad at me, and they gave me they're gonna threaten my life. I got a couple of death threats a couple months ago about the whole ordeal that we went through.
Yeah.
And it's always the same thing. You don't know exactly who this person is, and it's just big talk about stuff or whatever, and people get very intense and very, very passionate pretty easy. But when it comes to the submissions, they get touchy about it, and I get that. But I obviously I'm still around, so they never made.
At least they were empty threats, right?
Yeah, they never made good on that promise. But it's what happens sometimes, and I hope that they have improved on their comics so they don't have to get so upset anymore when people reject them.
Are you still getting a hard time? You mentioned a few months ago, I guess. Are you still getting a hard time from people, or is that kind of cooled off?
Man, I tell you this, right? Before all that happened, I don't have anyone blocked still. I don't block people. But because I find I used to block people. I find that it's not useful because people will just create a different account if they really want to harass you. And, so I didn't have anyone blocked or muted at that time. It just was, a free for all essentially. And after that happened, I think at this point I have like about 1,000 people muted. So because I view blocking as, I don't want you to see what I'm saying. And I view muting as, I just don't want to see what you have to say.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not saying anything bad. So I don't have any fear of them, seeing my tweets or whatever. I'm just not someone who's going to feel, I shouldn't have said that. I stand by whatever it is that I've said. So if there is stuff going on, sometimes people will tell me, they'll send me a screenshot or whatever, if it's something ridiculous or whatever. It certainly has died down, but I think maybe about once or twice a week, I still get someone that taps me on the shoulder about it. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't really make an attempt to find it. And and those people don't necessarily directly try to find me. And perhaps if they do, maybe I already have them muted and that's why I'm not seeing it. But it's, for people like that become very, very obsessed in a situation, like comics. And again, I use the word that they're passionate about it, and people do care. That's the sad part, is that at the end of it, everybody cares so much, and that's why they get so upset. And it gets to this point of sometimes blind levels of hatred sometimes.
Yeah.
I want to see everyone in comics succeed, even if I don't like your book, even if I don't like you. I want to succeed. I want to see you succeed because I care about the retailer that sells your book. I care about the industry at large. I care about having a healthy industry. So I care about the fact that if these people become obsessed with hating on me or hating on someone else or whatever it may be, those are all tweets and actions that could be used towards promoting the things they want to see succeed. They want to see me fail. How about you make these other things succeed? And that's what I'd rather see. Even the people that have left Alterna, some of the people were really rooting for them out of spite because of me, not necessarily because they want to support these people. Yeah. But I hope that they go and they support them on their next book because they're going to need it. We all need the support. Yeah. And if you're going to hate on me, fine, hate on me, but please support the person you want to see succeed over me. Right. And that's something I think in the industry we don't see enough of. I don't think we see enough of that support for the creators and the books that we say that we love, sometimes, especially from a particular kind of person that exists out there. And instead we see it's more apt to create this kind of drama and a whirlwind of craziness, as opposed to a productive and positive thing, which is what comics should always be about.
Yeah. So this is totally shifting gears. I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I did have a question about black and white versus color comics from like a business standpoint. If someone's sending in a submission, and they, is there one that's preferable to you over the other, black and white versus color, or does it not matter?
No, it doesn't really matter, especially on newsprint. I'm finding black and white compared to color, the cost is almost nothing. What does matter though is you have to pay a colorist. So
right.
It would matter more for the creative team than on my end as a publisher. Color books do tend to sell better than black and white, although oddly enough, our two highest selling titles are both black and white, Mother Russia and The Chair. But The Chair is my title, and that's been out for a while now, and it had a movie adaptation and all kinds of other things that I'm not gonna throw into the mix there in terms of judging comics across the board. So color, though, I find tends to sell better.
People like color.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's see. I've seen, I guess I had not a lot of questions, but what's the color palette on newsprint? That's an interesting question. That's from Nunya.
Same. This is a good one to answer. It's the same pretty much for any book. Let me. I know that there's people going, well, newsprint, that's like the books I used to read, and those didn't have the greatest color. So we just had this one come out. It's called Feast or Famine. It sold out at distribution. Technically, it sold out before its release, but I didn't want to say that and scare people away thinking that it was gone and they shouldn't go to a store. Sold out at distribution basically means that when it goes to Diamond orders about 10 to 15% more, especially if it's a #1. This way, they can immediately refill a bunch of orders, and they don't have to ask us to send in a reorder, which takes time. It takes an extra week to 2 weeks sometimes to process that. And by that time, the book, it already has been out at other places, and what's the point? So this sold out pretty much the first day of release. There's still copies, obviously, through publisher, not through distribution. But this book is on newsprint. So for you guys wondering about what colors can be on newsprint, all the colors can be on newsprint.
And this is really like the innovation with the way that colors work digitally, and people coloring in Photoshop. You have so much leeway to make great looking pages. So I didn't think it would matter, but that's good to see.
Yeah, and because we do a lot of pre-press work too to make sure that the color levels are acceptable for newsprint, that it's not too saturated. So this way people can still have a wide array of colors on here without worrying about bleed through and things like that. So it all doesn't print necessarily as vibrantly or sometimes as garishly as modern comics can look, depending on the colorist and the pre-press that's done. But you can use whatever colors. We adjust the ink, not saturation levels, the ink coverage levels. It's different for those that are very in tune and interested with CMYK and adjusting levels and things like that. For newsprint, you always want to make sure it's about 230 total saturation. And what that means is if it's on any kind of paper stock, your black, for instance, could be full 100 all the way to make a deep, rich black. If you did that, though, on newsprint, the thing would soak through. So you want to make sure that the black is adjusted. It's usually like a 50 for a cyan, 30 for a magenta, 30 for yellow, and like 95 to 100 on black, depending. But It's just little things like that that you have to adjust for in newsprint.
Well, great. I really appreciate you having you on. We've had an hour, so thank you for your time. That was really helpful. Yeah, I think it'd be fun to do this in the future again sometime if you'd be okay with that.
Yeah, no problem. And if you've got any questions too, feel free to ask them, or if the chat you want to see me answer any other questions. I got a little bit more time, but
Great.
if you've got to go, then don't worry about it.
Oh no, I'm set. You're later than I am, so I've got time. But yeah, any questions from chat? Speak now. I know there's probably been tons of questions, so I apologize. It's hard to get through them. I'm gonna get this figured out. I think I had. Let me think. I had one more question about crowdfunding. So how long do you have your campaigns go? Is it like 2 months?
Usually the campaigns that we've done tend to be about 20 to 30 days. I've had campaigns that are like 7 days, and they create a sense of urgency. And in those campaigns, we've usually raised 2 to 3 times the goal because of it. But the average campaign is usually about 3 weeks to 4 weeks.
Okay. Nice. Okay, here's a question from Benny J. Where does Alterna draw the line on profanity?
Language is, we have all kinds of books. We have all ages, which we basically just say it's kind of like a video game system. We have E for everyone, T for teen, and M for mature. And we've got, for instance, my own title, The Chair, is probably one of the most disturbing and intense and graphic and whatever that we have. Of course, I followed up The Chair with a children's book back in the day. I made a hockey children's book years after it. But so we take all kinds of different profanity and things like that. I don't really publish books that feature a whole lot of like nudity or sexual scenes or things like that. But it's mostly, we don't really get a whole lot that comes our way that has that. So it's kind of like it's just, we just don't see a lot of submissions like that. So I end up not publishing a lot of stuff that has that. But I always try to just keep in mind, well, does the profanity add at all to the story, or is it just, gratuitous and just
right?
So it depends, because if it's gratuitous and it's also for comedic effect, then it's different. But if it's just bad writing is bad writing. So it really depends. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, so I love how you sort of staked out the two extremes. Then you've got the horror, graphic horror, and then the children's book. That's awesome. Is there a type of book that you want to see, or it's just whatever comes through the door?
I never really specifically look for a type, because of the fact that I love the fact that we're creator owned, and I don't want to necessarily say, well, I'm done with sci-fi. I don't want to see any more sci-fi books. Because then what happens is, of course, then the person who was waiting to submit the next best sci-fi book to ever, be created ends up going, I guess I'll skip on Alterna. I'll submit it somewhere else. So I always want to see everything and anything. I don't want to dissuade anybody, but I'm always looking for a really, really good superhero book. I'm always looking for different genres that we haven't quite published yet. So everyone's always asking us about where's a good steampunk book, or a good, I think someone said Kung Fun. Yeah, we get a sequential geek is always asking for the Kung Fun. I don't get any of those as far as submissions go. So that's what happens with that. If this was a Marvel, let's say, or I had all kinds of characters at my disposal, it'd be a whole different story with how it's run. But this is all about the creators that bring their books to Alterna. So I planned on one day scouting for books and tapping people on the shoulder from Kickstarters and Indiegogo, but we end up getting so many submissions every month, I don't have the time to do that. Yeah. So it just, I always say every year I'm going to try to do that, and every year I just never have the need to do it.
There's a question from Anne Graham. It's does Alterna only print comics with specific dimensions size-wise?
As far as single issue comics go, yes, only because retail is very particular. Comic fans in general are very particular with the size of their single issues, but retail even more so, because they have actual structures in place that don't expect you to come along with a magazine-sized comic or a mini comic, let's say, and then they go, well, how do I display this? So they're very accustomed to it being a certain standard comic size. As far as graphic novels go, there's a little more play there, but we usually tend to keep the graphic novel size at either 6x9, which is kind of a standard book industry size, and it also saves some money with the printer, or we size them at 5.5 by 7.5. Mostly that just is our anthologies are that size. But we've had graphic novels before that are smaller, bigger, wider. Sometimes they're that horizontal format, the landscape format. So it really depends, but it's always more, when we go down that road, it turns into, well, how much does that cost? Is that worth putting it at that size? Can a retailer display it at that size? It turns into all those different questions, as opposed to if you're just a self-publisher, you can kind of do whatever you want to do. It's a little more freeing. But as soon as you start getting involved with retail and all that other kind of stuff, especially the book industry gets very, very, very particular about the size of your book. If it's too big or too small, or there's not enough spine on there, or it's not a really easily readable spine, it can go from a book that gets stocked to a book that just no one will know about it ever. So there's a lot goes into it.
Here's another great question from Yucky Gum Comics. Please ask if there's a preferred length. I've noticed that a lot of 3-issue miniseries. So yeah, that's a great question. Is there like a preferred length of the run of the comic?
A good sweet spot I find for most comics, and this is because of the way the industry works. It's 3 to 4 issues on the miniseries, and the reason for that, Alterna books come out every other month. It's bi-monthly. I know some people think bi-monthly. You know, they hear bi-monthly goes twice a month, but they kind of I know they can mean both, but the twice monthly has become kind of the thing in comics when they talk about it, or bi-weekly or things like that. But so our books come out once every other month. So for instance, the books that were released this month, the next one will be released in 2 months, and so on. Now, for those that don't know, the industry is really, really, really dependent upon pre-orders. So the way that works is that the pre-orders that are taken right now for December, those are for books that are coming out ideally in February. Now, if you're a retailer, what that means is that this book will come out in February. If this is a monthly title, what happens is that you are ordering the first 3 issues without really knowing how issue number 1 even did. So that's why most books, you'll see it goes number 1 up here, and then usually nosedives on number 2, maybe dips a little bit on 3, and then if the book is doing well, the number 4 starts to climb back up. But because of that system, what occurs is that the book just became very difficult to find for all the people who bought number 1 that really couldn't find number 2, kind of couldn't care less by number 3, and then now only the diehards have stayed with it at number 4. So it doesn't create a system that's accustomed to seeing a title grow, unfortunately. So what we try to do at Alterna, especially where they're released bi-monthly, is that the reader will understand, okay, this comes out January, March, May, etc. Now the retailer sees that and they go, okay, well, I can figure out at least who kind of pre-ordered number 1. So when I pre-order number 2, I can have a better idea, okay, of what to expect. So because of that, Alterna has one of the lowest percentage decreases from an issue 1 to an issue 2. It's usually about 30 to 40% of a decrease. Sometimes we'll see books from Marvel or Image or whoever. It's like a 70, 80% drop from a number 1 to a number 2. So because we have that little bit of a break and the system is kind of predicated towards pre-orders in such a big way, it enables retailers to make a better decision. It enables readers also to make a better decision. And the system, we just have to play within it. So a 4-issue miniseries seems to work the best because it just enables the story to kind of maintain its momentum as much as possible. Once it gets a little longer than that, like our 5 and 6 issue minis, they tend to get a little bit, it gets a little bit weird at that point, I find. But if a story has to be told within 5 or 6 issues, like it just has to be told properly in that amount, and it's a good story, I'm going to stick it out. I'm not going to tell the creator, you know, chop that down to 3 or 4 or whatever. So what we'll do sometimes is we'll break it up. So we'll break up Midnight Mystery, for example, was submitted as a 12-issue series. I said, okay, well, if we do 12 issues with retail, by issue 7 or 8, we might be facing cancellation from Diamond. So not from me, from Diamond. So I said, let's split it up. Let's make it that it's 3 volumes, 4 issues each. And this way we can present them all and they'll all be able to come out and we'll never have to face, oh man, Diamond's going to cancel this book on us, which is essentially then canceling the book on the reader and on the retailer. So we've split up different series like that. So you'll have Blood Realms like that. You'll have Midnight Mystery like that and all that stuff. I'd love to have it just be continuous with the number system. I'd love to be able to have every title at Alterna be an ongoing. I'd love to hit issue 25, issue 50, issue 100, all these milestones. But that's not the market anymore, unfortunately. Oh. So because of that, we only have 2 titles that are ongoing. It came out on a Wednesday. It's an anthology, horror, sci-fi, fantasy. That's ongoing. And then ICYMI, which is basically In Case You Missed It, and it's a reprint series, and that's ongoing as well. And both of those are going to be on newsstands. Newsstand likes ongoing. They like to see, newsstand buyers like to see issue 10 come along, issue 20, issue 30. It instills confidence in those markets and in those buyers. So it's funny to see how comics have left the newsstand, and yet we see these constant reboots. We see these constant recyclings of numbers and the system being predicated on number 1. Number 1s used to be loss leaders. Now we're seeing number 1s with the prices through the roof. And it's because of the fact that that's where the money is.
Right. Oh, is there a, not as far as issues go, but page number even, is there like a sweet spot for page numbers when you're talking about miniseries, or is that irrelevant?
Not so much with necessarily the miniseries, but per issue, we try to get around 32 pages. And that includes some ads and things like that. But that seems to be the sweet spot for an issue.
Here's a question. Gabe301, what's ICYMI stand for?
In case you missed it. It's basically there's a hashtag ICYMI, and we just kind of just hijacked that hashtag and turned it into a title. And this way, when anyone talks about ICYMI, basically anyone who ever uses that hashtag or searches it will see ICYMI and go, why are they talking about a comic book all the time? And it's pretty good marketing because of that.
Nice. Question about let's see, from Sequential Geek, Alterna Comics, is there a possibility for an Alterna spinner rack at a dollar store or something similar?
I would love to do that. It's just the spinner racks used to be supplied by distribution, and when they weren't supplied by distribution, they were supplied by a publisher, a much wealthier publisher than what Alterna is. So the spinner racks are very expensive. And I'd love to see us have comics on a spinner rack, but I'll settle, honestly, for putting the comic right next to the candy or the bubble gum or whatever it is, or a People magazine or whatever. If we could just get comics again in stores where people go, instead of telling people to come to us, if we could have comics go to them, the whole industry would turn around again. It's just unfortunate that this is the mindset of the industry.
Great. Well, I think we'll end it off there, but I just wanted to say one last time, thank you for coming. Really appreciated talking to you, and yeah, we'll definitely have to do this again. And then everyone here, please give me a like, subscribe, and then also take a trip over to Alterna Comics, either on Twitter or also their YouTube channel and subscribe, because that really helps out too. So yeah, we will see you all later. Thanks.